वेलकम फ्रेंड्स ऑन दिल्ली IAS एंड आज इस वीडियो में हम डिस्कशन करेंगे GS2 का टॉपिक। काफ़ी इम्पोर्टेंट टॉपिक है GS2 का, ग्रुपिंग एंड एग्रीमेंट। So basically its full name is Bilateral, Regional and Global Grouping and Agreement involving India and affecting India's interest. Okay, so let us start. Okay दोस्तों, so whenever these things come in our mind like bilateral, regional and global grouping and agreement involving India and affecting India's interest, then what should come in our mind? Basically there are three main component of this, like bilateral grouping and regional grouping and bilateral, regional and global grouping. So what are these bilateral grouping? If you will see bilateral grouping, like you can say this India US, India Russia and India China. These are bilateral grouping. India Sri Lanka, India UAE. So these all are example of bilateral grouping. And what is this regional grouping? Regional, like in this SAARC and ASEAN, European Union. These all are example of regional grouping. And global grouping, like United Nations Organization, G20, G7. These are global groupings. Okay, so these are groupings. And second thing is, okay, now the important thing is, whenever these things come grouping, why are these important? Why these groupings are important? Why do we need to read them? Okay, so these are important because they cover many important aspects of national interest. For example, these all bilateral, regional and global grouping covers mainly 6 major component. Which are these? They are like because they cover economic interest. Okay, they cover economic and then strategic, security, and they cover cultural and then multilateral forum and historic. Okay, these aspects they cover economic, strategic, security, cultural and economic. That's why these are important. Suppose you can take example of any country, any bilateral relation like India China, India Russia, India US, India Sri Lanka, India UAE. Their relations are mainly dependent on these 6 factors: economic, strategic and security, cultural, these 6 factors. Okay, so yes. Okay, and similarly in place of this bilateral relation, you can take like this regional grouping. Okay, regional grouping, SAARC, ASEAN, EU. They all are also dependent on these 6 main aspects. Similarly, United Nations Organization, G20, G7, like these two especially are based on economic interest. Where is this? And United Nations Organization, almost all things like security, UN Security Council, strategic and cultural aspect, UNESCO, है ना? So these cover these aspects. That's why these groupings are important. Okay, now one more thing is, these are grouping. Now second, we read about agreement involving India and India's interest. Many times we read about bilateral agreement, okay, trilateral, multilateral agreement. What are these agreement? So if you will see here, let me change the color. Suppose, yes, second thing was agreement. Okay, agreement. So if you will see why agreement are important, because these also cover these aspects like economic, strategic, security, cultural and forum and historic. For example, agreement, agreement, for example, this trade agreement cover this aspect, economic aspect. Okay, maritime agreement cover this strategic aspect. Okay, trade, maritime, and FDI agreement. Okay, so these agreements also cover these aspects. If we will go one by one, then it will become too long video. I want to make crisp, concise, basically main things of this topic to be understandable by common person who is preparing for UPSC. Otherwise, if we will go too much detail, then it will be so much boring and we will not able to identify what were the main crux of this chapter: bilateral and regional and global grouping, agreement involving India and affecting India's interest. One more interesting thing is here that you can see here, these regional groupings can be divided into two groups: one that involve India, and second in which India is not a part. Okay, India is not a member. Okay, so India is a member in these following, like SARC and other than SARC, SCO and BIMSTEC. Okay, SARC, SCO, BIMSTEC, and and India is not a member of like EU, European Union, and NATO. Yes, NATO and European Union, NATO, and ASEAN. Okay, one interesting thing, as I told you, these groupings are important because of these reasons. How can we relate these things? Okay, we can see now, like these, over these grouping: SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and one more is here in which India is part, that is BRICS. These two talk about economic, political, and economic, political, and social aspect. Yes, you can say. Okay, and this NATO, other than economic, it has some defense component also, defense, security. This SCO also have this component, not defense exact, but anti-terror activity है ना, anti-terror, and these EU and ASEAN mainly depend, and this SARC also little bit, these are mainly for economic activity. Their ultimate goal is to become common market, single common market. Okay, although SARC is not successful in achieving its full potential of becoming open market. Okay, this SARC, let me change the color, this is SARC. Okay, and okay, these are mainly regional grouping. Now let us see about these global grouping. What are these global grouping? UNO, G20, G7. So mainly UNO, in UNO also it consists of many bodies, like let me remove it. UNO consists of like World Trade Organization, okay, World Health Organization, and World Trade Organization, World Health, UNESCO, for different purpose, different bodies. Okay dosto, so this chapter is finished. We have seen from the top view, bird eye view of this bilateral, regional, and global grouping and agreement involving India and India's interest. If you like, please subscribe the channel. This give me motivation to make more video and to help more aspirant community who wanted to become IAS officer. Okay, thank you.